There are two forms of the verb to do, so there's things we should do and things we can do. We've heard an awful lot, and we've seen reported from Mr. Letta and Mr. Draghi some great suggestions of what we should do. But we also have to ask, how much of that can we do? How much of that is getting done? You've been on record saying that Europe needs to rewire its approach to growth, and you've had a particular focus on European production. Can you give us a progress report, if you like, maybe within the context of the Draghi report? How is Europe doing against the scorecard that Mr. Draghi laid out?
Well, first of all, let me say that this deviation, this distinction between what we should do and what we can do is not always that definitive in the following sense. I think that for Europe, or for any strategic decision that you want to take, it's very important to share the vocabulary. It's very important to share the north and the compass. And in this regard, the fact that my good friend Enrico Letta and Mario Draghi shaped those reports and defined the deliverables, and we agreed upon the deliverables, is quite important by itself, because this means that you will have convergence upon those deliverables. Now, the question is by when, how quickly, and how optimally, because you can always version the deliverables. I'm optimistic in the sense that even if you take the core elements of policy that we need to have results by the end of this year, be that the Savings and Investment Union or be that energy, we already see movement on the ground. On the Savings and Investment Union, you see movement in terms of securitization, in terms of the supplementary pensions package, where the Council will define its position quite soon, and in what, in my view, is the core element, we're seeing discussions progress, the market integration and supervisions package. We have already been discussing this at the level of the ECOFIN significantly and at the Eurogroup, and I believe that it is the ambition of the Irish presidency to deliver that result as well quite quickly. If we take energy as a core policy area where we need to see significant progress, I would mention an IMF report which states that the impact of the crisis in the Middle East is 12% less of what it would have been had we not taken requisite energy measures in Europe in terms of investment. This means that we have done certain things post-2022. Also, the perimeter of the measures that we're now taking, the short-run measures, also fit our long-run ambition. If you look at the escape clause, the expansion of the escape clause that we have on defense now includes energy investments as well, per the proposal of the Commission. So we understand that energy is another area where we need to define and create a common energy union. Of course, we need to do much more. We need more investment in grids, we need more investment in storage, we need more investment in interconnectors. We don't yet have a singular energy market in Europe. We don't yet have an energy union. This is also a core deliverable. And third and final point, the digital euro will be a reality by 2029, because we already had a positive vote at the level of the Econ Committee of the European Parliament. We will have a vote in the Parliament this summer as well. And then we'll have a pilot project and a deliverable in terms of the digital euro quite soon. So movement is taking place. Of course, we need to do much more, and on many fronts. I made a proposal myself last week with regards to centralizing the auctions of spectrum across the 27 member states of the European Union. I had the chance to share this with my good friend Enrico Letta and with Mario Draghi and with my colleagues at the European Council. The idea was the following, that even though we have two European champions in terms of infrastructure in telecommunications, unlike other areas, we sit at the technology frontier in terms of 5G infrastructure and hopefully at 6G infrastructure. We still have a very fragmented market in terms of telecommunications. So as we're looking for new own resources for the MFF, perhaps we can think in more ambitious terms by centralizing the auctions and then using also the EIB to leverage a part of that amount, thus generating more funds, thus not rendering the MFF negotiations and the MFF discussions a zero-sum game, but rather trying to render them a positive-sum game, a more competitiveness-prone discussion, which is what we should be doing in order to be more ambitious. So I'm overall optimistic. It's not a yes or no question. It's not a black and white discussion. It's a question of how much progress we can make and how much distance we can cover on the field. And right now, I see that the political conditions are there The negative externalities are also there, which are pushing us to deliver the results. But I'm quite optimistic that we will manage to deliver very important and very significant things quite soon. The political will is there.
Production is at the heart of this, production, productivity, and maybe a return to a more focused manufacturing economy in Europe. To what extent can Europe aim to go back to a more manufacturing-based economy? What does manufacturing mean now? What does production mean in this technological era?
Well, first of all, in order to address your question, you overall need to define your ambition in terms of who you are and what you're trying to achieve. So there, it was actually a discussion that we had in the last Eurogroup meeting. The idea is to have a very clear technological doctrine. The Commission is also trying to advance this, because technology will more or less define every single policy area. Be that in energy, be that in AI, be that in more or less everywhere. Technological innovations are going to define productivity, and they're going to define our capacities to achieve and sustain economic growth. Because in effect, we're witnessing a duality. There are many similarities there are many analogies with Greece here, because Greece, circa 2019, had a series of things that it hadn't done for a very long time. So the obvious thing that you haven't done for a very long time provides an obvious dividend for growth once you do it. Mm-hmm. It's a dividend of the obvious, in a sense. On the other hand, you need to address and you need to optimally respond to the emerging challenges of tomorrow. So every policymaker in the world has this duality. So in the European sense, on the one hand, you need to offer the deliverable and offer the progress in terms of what you haven't done for a very long time. The capital markets union, the banking union, the energy union, all of those things, but they will produce a growth dividend. On the other hand, we need a very clear doctrine on technology. So this question, I think, is optimally addressed by having a sense of European champions in technology rather than national champions, and by having the stamina and the strategy to create ecosystems around them. So what is the strategy on spectrum that I more or less tried to describe before? It's a strategy to create ecosystems around two technology players, which we do have, one in Sweden and one in Finland, Ericsson and Nokia, and to create big ecosystems with the application layer being funded by the EIB ideally, but also primarily by the private market, in order to be able to achieve higher levels of growth. This is the goal. So, in effect, we have three options with regards to technology. One of them is lead. Pick the areas where you have champions, pick the areas where you sit close to the technology frontier, and grow them so that you can achieve very high levels of growth at a global scale. The second option is build. Pick certain areas where you don't have the advantage, but where you believe that building the advantage would be existential. We did that with Airbus. We did that with Galileo. We cannot overdo that, though, because if we believe that we can make European versions of everything, we're wrong. Frankly, because we have a finite amount of funding that we can use. So if we are to use it, it's optimal to use it in the areas where you have the advantage and where you can create and sustain the advantage so that you're not asymmetrically interdependent, because sovereignty is not autonomy. Autonomy is a dimension of sovereignty. You can exercise sovereignty through other means, through control. So your third option is very sharp, very smart regulation. It's being able to partner and shape the technologies which you don't own, but which you can optimally control if you're a really smart regulator, which we're not always in reality. So those are the three options. Of course, the devil lies in the detail, being able to codify which is which and how you can optimally build your strategy. But again, fixing the plumbing of the European economy, in a sense, having the deployment of the Savings and Investment Union fully there is quite important also in this regard, because you need to be able to finance those investments. Any startup that you have in Europe should be able to grow in Europe. It doesn't. At some point, it's more or less existential that it becomes a Delaware corporation and that it requires American mezzanine funding. Now, that's not a bad thing, but it should be an option, not a quasi-necessity. So you should be able to have all the funding mechanisms in place in order to be able to have your full ambition fulfilled at the level of the European continent.
I wanted to turn to another topic, sort of paradigmatic topic. I think it's been a consensus here on the stage this morning and generally out there in the wider world that one of the drivers of European policy at the moment is the need for resilience. In a hostile world, threats from challenges from east and West and the need for a more resilient European economy. 10, 20 years ago, the key word was efficiency. The reliance on distant partners was one of the ways that you made the European economy more competitive by being more efficient, by being lower cost. How far along that spectrum have we gone? And is there a risk that in this focus on resilience, you begin to lose that efficiency? What cost is Europe going to be paying because it's focusing so much on this issue of resilience?
Well, again, I think this touches upon the previous answer as well. Because at the end of the day, you need to define what sovereignty means. So you need to have a European strategy about those things. Will you define it as autonomy, or will you define it as a broader and more complex, multidimensional issue? My answer is the latter, not the former. So we live in an interdependent world. Is multilateralism challenged in this interdependent world? Yes, it is. But this fluctuates. It temporally fluctuates. The question is, how strong are you when you sit at the table? Because you will always sit at the table. You will never be fully autonomous. The question is, can you be in a world where this interdependence is not asymmetric, where you have many areas where you are the strongest, but where you also build significant synergies with your international partners? So you will always live in this interdependence. The question is, can you further capacity build yourself in certain areas? This is what, in my view, defines resilience. And also, you need very smart and very sharp synergies. Let me give you one example. Cloud services. So I mentioned 5G infrastructure. The policies of the first Trump administration, as a consequence, helped the two European companies that I mentioned before. There was no American champion on the table. That was not the goal of the American administration, of course, but it was the consequence of the administration. Did we as Europeans take this chance in order to create that big ecosystem, that pan-European spectrum, that capable economic environment to render them even bigger European champions by taking advantage of this externality? No, we didn't, frankly. So that's a pity. This is an area where you build because you have the capacity to build. You sit at the technology frontier. In cloud, American hyperscalers have 2/3 of the European market. There is no European company that has more than 2% of the market. So is this an area where you focus by developing a European champion? In my view, it's an area where you focus by being a really smart regulator so that you exercise your sovereignty through control. Zero switching costs ideally between the hyperscalers, or ownership of data and full control of your data being in premise in your country, those types of things. But you need to focus where you will invest every single euro that you have. So I think that any business person in this room would tell you that when they make investments, they invest on their winners, on their winning propositions, on their winning projects. I think that politicians should do the same, frankly. And we haven't done that enough. We need to do that much more. But you do that by making an honest assessment of who you are, where you're capable at. You pick certain areas where you believe that you should indeed have this non-resilience for reasons of national security or for supply chain resilience, and you move ahead. And since you live in an interdependent world, I think by being cognizant of this and by having a full mapping of the field, investing in our champions, investing at our champions is the smartest way to move forward and the most realistic.
Okay, let's stick very briefly with technology for a second. You talked about picking your winners, picking your fights in a sense, and putting your resources where you think they can best give you advantage.
With a couple of exceptions, if you pick them. National security or certain issues, but not many exceptions.
Okay. Let's talk very briefly about AI models. Sovereignty in AI is going to be an important issue. But Europe is in a very disadvantaged position in terms of competitiveness on a global scale across the AI stack. So there are things that Europe can do in terms of regulation, but it isn't going to develop and control the most widely adopted models. Is that a problem? How do you get around that?
Well, we have this discussion at the Eurogroup tomorrow. We have a discussion on AI, and we have invited one of our European champions on AI, Mistral, to be present at this discussion. So, frankly, first we need to have an assessment of the implications of AI. And those implications have, again, a duality. If I were to codify this, I would say that on the one hand, it resembles a moon race, which touches upon your question. On the other hand, it resembles a nuclear arms race. Because if we look at the implications of the LLM of Anthropic mythos, well, frankly, it can basically hack into any system. So the level of patching that will be required once we have an assessment of all the systems, and so far we're, as European finance ministers, we're focusing on banks. But you need an assessment of every single system to happen throughout the world. So many of the systems that we have, we know that I used to be a digital minister, as you know. They're quite old, they're quite dated.
Yeah.
So we will require a very significant level of investment in order to be able to address this challenge, on the one hand, which we don't yet expect. Second, we need a level of multilateral governance of this, because those LLMs are extremely powerful. The way to govern them is not a European level regulation, or even an American level regulation, or a Chinese level regulation. No country is big enough to govern this, I would say, or no continent by itself. It requires orchestration. And the challenge, which all of us are quite aware of, is that it requires some type of orchestration, again, in an era when multilateralism has its own challenges. So on the one hand, you require this. On the other hand, to address the positive aspect of your question, the productivity gains that you can have out of the technologies, should they be deployed properly, are immense. So again, you need a strategy about this. Every minister in Europe right now, every minister in the world feels the implication and the impact of AI. The core difference compared to the previous technological revolutions and disruptions is going to be the speed and the scale of change. What used to happen in decades will now happen in years and months, not even weeks, one would argue. So this exponential time frame and this exponential mechanism of change is quite different to the linear way in which we as human beings perceive the world, or as a critic would say, the sublinear way that political systems react to those types of challenges typically. So the challenge is very big in front of us. But again, going back to your original question, don't underestimate the value of developing a common vocabulary and a common strategy. The strategy that Enrico did and Mario Draghi did is extremely important for us. It's the north that we have in our compass at every single meeting, at every single discussion, and at every single policy development discussion that we're having, even at the domestic or at the pan-European level. So this is a big part of the reason why progress is actually now happening on the ground.